Welcome back to the Junkie Sports Podcast today. Today's episode is going to be a little bit of an interesting one. So it kind of is a little bit of an extension of our Panic and Persist series we do with those playoff teams. But today we're going to talk about all of the teams that didn't make the playoffs and sort of the personnel changes, maybe lineup changes, free agency signings, trades, draft talk, all that sort of thing. We're going to encompass it all together, and we're going to talk about it all here today with all the teams that are terrible and did not make the playoffs. So we'll hop right into it. We're going to go ahead and start off in the Eastern Conference, work from that 15th seed all the way up to the 9th seed. Davis, why don't you kick us off? Cleveland Cavaliers, worst team in the East. What kind of changes are you looking to make here in the offseason?
Yeah, so defense has definitely been their biggest problem as of late. And so, I mean, with that, they need to be drafting someone with their fifth overall pick that is more defensive oriented, and also trying to address this whole Kevin Love contract situation over the offseason, I think needs to be at the top of their priority because although yes, they have some young guards in their rotation that they've been collecting over these last couple of drafts. On paper, I mean, stuff just still is not clicking with that team. And I know they had some coaching changes over the last season and whatnot, but I mean, even still, I think like in the draft they need to be going after a guy like whether it's Obi Toppin or Isaac Okoro out of Auburn. Or I mean, I don't think at this point they need to be going after more guards, but if they do go another guard, maybe Tyrese Halliburton, just because he's probably the best fit right now for any team that's looking to add a guard that has more perimeter defending skills and is better on the pick and roll. But yeah, this team is still for me a long way away from being anywhere in the playoff realm. I think Darius Garland he's all right. Colin Sexton is very nice, but they still need a lot more help, especially just because in general, I know the East is a lot weaker than the West, but still their roster composition is horrible. And they need to be focusing on how they can get rid of that Kevin Love contract, or if they're just going to stick through it and try to, keep go Philadelphia 76ers route and kind of rebuild through the draft over these next couple seasons. They love getting those early picks in the draft.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I kind of agree. Like, I mean, they're terrible. I think, in my opinion, the only bright spot on their team is Colin Sexton. I mean, he finished off the season nice. I think he averaged around like 18, 19. I don't like the Garland-Sexton combo. It's so weird. It boggled my mind when they drafted Darius Garland. I did not understand it. I feel like they didn't give Sexton that opportunity to grow and develop yet, and he's turning into a nice player. And I just think it's so weird the way they drafted Garland. But I agree. Kevin Love. I think Kevin Love is someone they can trade to a sort of contender. Kevin Love's still a nice player in this league, and I think they can maybe get some assets in return. But I think a really, really big focus for them is that they need to 100% pray that Andre Drummond decides to not pick up his player option, because that's like 28, 29 million on the books. I know there's been some reports coming out that he's really genuinely undecided about picking it up because he wants to go play and compete for a championship. Andre Drummond, I'm going to speak to you right now, buddy. Don't turn down 29 million because you're never, ever going to get that offer to the rest of your career. The centers are dead in today's NBA, and you should 100% take that contract. But I know the Cleveland Cavaliers are hoping that he's not. And so I think this is just going to be a weird offseason for the Cavaliers. They kind of got really sort of New York Knicks in this draft and got that fifth pick. I might coin that term from now on, a little New York Knicks. But, yeah, I feel bad for the Cavaliers. It's just, I don't know. I agree with you, Davis. This roster construction is just so odd. It's just, I don't know what their plan and focus is. It's just so weird to me.
Yeah, and especially like if you kind of look back in that 2019 draft and who was still available whenever they selected Darius Garland. I mean, hindsight's 2020, but I mean, guys like Jarrett Culver, Jackson Hayes, Roy Hachimura, PJ Washington, Cam Johnson, Tyler Hero. Like, I can keep going down this list, but they had a lot of good options in terms of guys that would have been more immediate impacts and also better defensively.
And it
just made no sense picking a guard. Like,
absolutely.
I don't know. There's some problems in their drafting history for sure. I mean, we're talking about the same Cavs franchise that blew the minds of everyone in the world after they picked Anthony Bennett first overall.
Yep.
So their scouting team is, I don't know.
Pretty terrible.
Yeah. But hopefully their player
development. Exactly. And I think, I don't know, it's hard for me to look at, as you kind of talked about with that draft and like some of the players that went, like, honestly, I was kind of surprised like the Cavs didn't try and trade down or something. I think Rui Hachimura would have been beautiful there. I think he could have learned under Kevin Love. I think they have similar games. I think Kevin Love's a little bit more of a shooter, but I think Rui Hachimura would have developed so nicely alongside Colin Sexton under Kevin Love. But yeah, at the end of the day, Cleveland fans, I don't know. Good luck. It's going to be a while before you guys are going to be – honestly, it might be a while before you guys are in the playoffs. Like, it's going to be tough for the next few years for sure. So let's go ahead and move up into the 14th seed in the East, the Atlanta Hawks. So, Davis, what sort of changes are you looking to make for this Hawks team?
So I think this Hawks team, although, yes, Trae Young is nice, I still don't think they're going to be anywhere in the playoff hunt for next season. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, obviously Trae Young doesn't really care on defense, which, okay, if you can get someone to play alongside him in the backcourt that is more defensive minded. I'm thinking Tyrese Halliburton at 6, or I think they have the 6th pick, maybe it's the 7th, but he'll probably be available for them to pick him. And I know a lot of mock drafts are having him kind of linked and slotted to go for the Hawks, and I think that would be a great addition, especially along Trae Young, because Tyrese Halliburton, as we've talked about in the past, is just the best 3-and-D player prospect in this upcoming 2020 draft. And, giving Trae Young another option to kind of, kick to and have some wide open threes look, because he's getting a lot of double teams and stuff like that, opens up a lot for him and their offense. But at the same time, I still think this team is not as close as some people might think to kind of making that next step. I know they have a lot of young pieces in general with DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish, even guys like Kevin Huerter. But I don't know. I think they're like in 2 or 3 years, I could see them, starting to kind of come up the ranks, and because they're developing alongside each other in terms of their age and their player development. But I still don't think this next year will be the year. I don't know if, a coaching change could be in the foreseeable future for them after next season, but I don't know. I really think one of the biggest priorities for them should be not giving John Collins a supermax, or not a supermax, but the max contract extension, because he's probably going to be asking for it. But I think with the amount of production that he gives you, he's not necessarily a guy that they can be kind of, committing to financially for the long term. He's nice, but kind of like I said, I think in general, this Hawks team could take a big step forward if they're able to get, a more veteran, like top 30 player in the league to play alongside Trae Young and kind of open up, more options for that offense. But I still think defensively, this team is going to continue to have problems unless they start addressing that over free agency and over the draft.
Yeah, so while you were talking, I was trying to do a little bit of quick math. One thing I want to bring up, so John Collins served a 25-game suspension. Yep. Can you guess what the Hawks' record was during those 25 games?
7-18.
4-21.
I mean, it's not a good Hawks team, period, though. They didn't end up with a great.
It's not a good Hawks team, and I would agree. And I understand that, but I want to say this. And of course, you can't just take this out, but I'm just doing some devil's advocate, a little bit of math here. So if you take out John Collins' suspension and look at the Hawks' win-loss record and their winning percentage, so take out that 4-21, obviously it's terrible. I'm not saying they would have done significantly better, but with John Collins on their roster, their winning percentage would have placed them ninth in the East. Ninth. Now I'm not saying John Collins is I agree with you. I don't think he deserves a max contract. I wouldn't be surprised if the Hawks gave it to him, but I don't think he deserves it. He's not that type of player in my eyes. But I think him not being on that team was just such a massive blow to that roster. I mean, that's their second best player, and they weren't able to get past that. I mean, him and Trae Young are just that dynamic pick and roll offense, and I think that was really difficult for them to overcome. And I think it's really evident in the fact that they went 4-21 in 25 games. And so I think I agree at this offseason they need to make better decisions in the draft. I mean, they've been consistently having great selections, like pick-wise in the draft, like where they're being placed, not necessarily their pick. But, I mean, I don't know. We aren't seeing these players come to fruition. I mean, obviously we're going to give them more time, but, like, I'm not high on DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish. Like, I think there was other pieces they could have picked in that draft. And, I mean, DeAndre Hunter is supposed to be this defensive lockdown monster. That's what he was known for in college in Virginia. And, like, when are we going to see that in the NBA? I mean, Cam Reddish had Paul George comps. Not saying that's the best comp in the world to have at this point after the playoffs, but he's supposed to be this amazing player. And, I mean, we're not seeing it. I want to give him plenty of time. I mean, sometimes it takes players a few years to grow and develop. But, I mean, at the end of the day, the Hawks need to do better. They need to give Trae Young help, because if they don't give him help soon, he's gone. And he's one of the best players they've had there in a really long time. And that man needs help. And so I think it's on the Hawks organization to just build a defensive-minded team around Trae Young, because he's not a good defender. And I think building a really strong defense around him and letting Trae Young do what he does best, which is put the ball in the hoop, I think that's a team that could compete for a playoff spot in the East. But, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Hawks gave John Collins a max contract, but I would definitely agree. He does not deserve it in any way, shape, or form. He's not that type of player in my eyes, but there's way worse players that have gotten a lot of money in the NBA, so who knows?
Yeah. So kind of along those lines, I'm kind of thinking, okay, so Rudy Gobert, right? If the Jazz don't want to pay him, which they probably won't, especially with some of the beef with Donovan Mitchell and some of the drama that's kind of percolated around that team, could you see a world where the Hawks potentially try to go after him and make a little splash in the free agency in terms of him?
I could see it, especially if it comes out, especially super early, that the Jazz are gonna not offer that to him and not pay Rudy Gobert. I think that would be a beautiful pickup. The one concern I would have is the Hawks do have Clint Capella on that roster, so I think they're gonna have to do something there. I mean, obviously Rudy Gobert is a massive upgrade over Clint Capella. So, cause I think they should go after. I think I would rather pay Rudy Gobert than I would John Collins. Unless the Hawks are just convinced that John Collins and Clint Capella can play lockdown defense and be good enough offensively. I think that's just a weird combo to me. But yeah, if they could go get Gobert, I'd love that. I think that'd be a really nice fit alongside Trae Young, lob threat, just defensive monster in the paint. So,
because I do think that the big man position for the Hawks is kind of where this team can make a lot of improvements and kind of make or break their system, how they go forward. And I think there's two options, and it's kind of the two true options in the NBA. Do you go with a guy that can help stretch the floor and knock down perimeter shots, or do you go with a big man that is more defensive minded and just kind of percolates around the rim? And for me, I think with Trae Young and his vision, I think, yes, they need a guy that, is good defensively, but you also can there's a lot of good wings in the NBA that are 3-and-D oriented. That's just kind of, if you want to be a good wing in the NBA right now, you have to be able to knock down threes and you have to be able to guard the perimeter. And so maybe with kind of that in mind, they don't need that rim protection down low. And they could maybe go for more of a big man that can also stretch the floor. Because, with Trae Young under the helm of, bringing the ball down the court and everything. I mean, we've seen the highlights. Like we've seen him play. He can find open players very creatively. And so I think giving him more options around the perimeter to kind of help spread the ball out and kind of also open up the lane for him to kind of get nifty with it down low. I think that might be a little bit more successful than bringing in a guy like Rudy Gobert that, is just more of a true, rim protector and someone that's, I mean, he struggled in the pick and roll package as well. And I know that's something Trae Young also struggles with. So I don't know if Rudy Gobert is the right fit, but I do think either they go with a defensive juggernaut and like a lob threat for Trae Young, or they go with someone that can stretch the floor. And I'm personally leaning more towards the latter. I think if they can get someone in there that's able to stretch
like Davis Bertans or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. But
yeah, and I think that's a good point. And I think moving towards that small ball is a great idea. And I think the best way for them to do that, if they want to stick with John Collins, is to focus him on defense, because if he can guard five for the most part and stretch a little bit, because he can play small ball five, and then maybe bring in like Davis Bertans or another shooter. I think that could work. I'd have to see it, but it's at the end of the day, the Hawks just need to build a defensive team around Trae Young, because he's terrible at defense, without a doubt. So let's go ahead and move up into the 13th seed. So we got the Detroit Pistons. So Davis, what are you going to do this offseason?
So the Pistons, of all the teams in the NBA right now, I'm really, really pessimistic about, their next 5 years compared to a lot of teams outside of maybe the Knicks. I think this is going to be a longer rebuild than what a lot of teams are accustomed to. And I don't think there's anyone that they can draft in this draft class I think they have the 9 pick or the 8 pick that would give them an immediate boost over the edge and kind of help get them, confident in their roster composition in the future. I don't know. I mean, Christian Wood is.
They have the 7th pick, by the way, just to interject, but they do have the 7th pick.
7th pick. Okay. So that means the Hawks had the 6th. So I was wrong on that. I'm sorry. But I will say a little bit of bias, but Svi Mikhailuk, he didn't get a ton of playing time.
That's a lot of bias.
Okay. So the bias is that he went to Kansas, but he was one of the youngest players he was one of the youngest seniors we've ever seen in college basketball, just because he signed or he came into college basketball as a 16-year-old or 17-year-old because he was Ukrainian and whatnot. But he's still very young for someone that, went 4 years to college. But I do think giving him, a little bit more playing time just to help get them to be winning a couple more games, giving their team a little bit more confidence would be nice. But I mean, they do have some solid. It's hard for me to say solid. There were some bright spots every once in a while on this team. Bruce Brown he was not really on anyone's radar before this season. He kind of, took advantage of some injuries for the Pistons during the regular season and got some playing time and was able to capitalize on it and had some decent games. Langston Galloway had a stretch of a month or so where he was on fire, but then that kind of died off. And so in general, I mean, this whole Blake Griffin situation is challenging for me. I know Blake Griffin's adapted his game quite a bit to be able to stretch the floor a lot more than, the typical Lob City Clippers days where he was just kind of, just the dunker in the league, the hype man. He's been able to adapt his game to kind of survive in the NBA a little bit longer. I don't think Sekou Demboya is going to be able to elevate his game significantly next season to the point where, they have a ton of confidence in building around him. Christian Wood's going to be expecting a decent amount of money if he is able to put up a good season again next season. And so, I mean, I think in terms of the draft, they should probably be going for a point guard for the future. And I think there's a lot of good guards in this draft, but the reason that I think they should go after a guard specifically is that they need someone that is just controlling this team a little bit more. And yes, they have Derrick Rose, but that's also why they should pick a point guard. They need to have someone learn under Derrick Rose because he only has one more year on his contract. And so, whoever they end up drafting, if it's a point guard, will have a year to be able to learn under Derrick Rose and kind of some of the experiences and things that he's picked up on in the league. And at this point, he's a veteran that can definitely help, pass down that information to a young up and coming guard. And, so for me, I don't know. This team's in a lot of trouble, but I don't know. I don't think there's like one quick fix for them. I really don't. They're going to be struggling for a little while.
Yeah, so I think the Pistons are in limbo. I mean, they're in that really, really, really weird spot where, like, yeah, they're winning a few games and they're not at the bottom, so now they're not getting a good draft pick, but their team is not good. The two bright spots on their team, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see them get traded here next season, one of the two. I know a lot of teams might be going after them, and Derrick Rose and Luke Kennard. I know there's been a lot of talks and conversations about D-Rose maybe going to LA in a package deal or something like that, which, by the way, would be incredibly entertaining. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, if I'm the Pistons, I think if I had to let someone go, I'd let go of Derrick Rose. I'd try to keep on Luke Kennard. I think Luke Kennard is a very, very nice player, shoots nearly 40% from three. He's underrated out there in Detroit. But, yeah, they need a lot of help, and then a lot of it's offensively. I mean, they just don't have people that can put the ball in the hoop. And so I think that's something they need to go after in the draft. I think a point guard's a good point, but I just think overall, like, I mean, ideally a point guard that can put the ball in the hoop. They need a scorer on that team. I know they're picking higher, but oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the name. You got North Carolina. Cole Anthony.
Cole Anthony.
I was blanking for a second. Yeah, I just blanked on that. But I know Cole Anthony can go a little bit farther in the draft, but that's someone I think would be a little nice out there in Detroit. I mean, that's what he was known for in high school. I know he struggled a little bit in college, but and with some efficiency issues. But I mean, in high school, that's what he was known for, was scoring. He was an elite scorer. And so I think that might be someone I might not be surprised to see him maybe trade down to or trade up to get. But overall, it's a really, really just odd team. I don't know where they're going. Like, they have some like nice like young pieces, but it's just like at the end of the day, they need people that can score consistently. They need someone who can put the ball in the hoop, and I don't see anyone on this roster averaging over 20. And they need to find someone that can do that, and they're only going to get that either through a package, in a trade, or in the playoffs. Because honestly, what free agent wants to go out and play in Detroit? There's not going to be anyone, especially in the limited free agency we have this offseason. Any team, like players that don't deserve it, are going to be getting a lot of money because there's no competition right now in free agency. There's not a lot of good players compared to what we'll see next offseason and next year on free agency. But I don't know. Pistons are a weird team. I want to see Derrick Rose get traded because I think that man deserves to compete for a championship. I'd love to see him go to the Lakers. I think that'd be so much fun to watch. But I'd really like to see him get traded to a contender because I think that man deserves to have the option to go win a ring because he ain't winning it in Detroit.
If you are the Pistons and you're the Timberwolves, do you see a world in which you can trade straight up Blake Griffin for the first overall pick?
If I'm the T-Wolves, I would not do that.
Really?
It wouldn't make sense to me. Why would I want someone who's been injured his entire career consistently? I think Blake Griffin's a nice player, but I just don't think he fits not only the timeline of that team, but he's never healthy. And I think Blake Griffin for the number one pick, if I'm a T-Wolves, it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't feel like I'm getting anything enough in return. I think they do it if they got Luke Kennard. I think Luke Kennard maybe – I wouldn't be surprised to see like Luke Kennard and maybe like next year's first round pick for this year's number one. I think that's a fair package deal. But if that's the case, who do you think the Pistons would go and get?
So they were linked to LaMelo.
Anthony Edwards, LaMelo?
Yes, very much heavily before the whole lottery selection got started. And I was kind of about that train. Like, I think LaMelo is a kind of guy that can help put Detroit's team back on the map and kind of get them a little bit more hope and optimism for the future. Because right now they really just don't have that. And I don't think there's anyone that they can take at 7 that's also going to be doing that. But I would love to see a world in which LaMelo is able to go play for the Pistons. I don't know why. I really think that would be good for the Detroit fan base, especially. I mean, it's good for any fan base if you're picking LaMelo Ball. Anyone wants to see him play, and they're going to get a lot of national TV and publicity. But I mean, he'd be able to take over that team day one and be the guy, which if he goes 1 or 2, he might not be able to step into the role where he's, the showcase guy every single night. Just why not? So I don't know. I would have liked to have seen that. I know the lottery, was wild and what happened has happened, but I'm still kind of optimistic that there could be some type of trade in the works to, try to get this Detroit Pistons team to somehow, move up and get LaMelo.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the T-Wolves trade the number 1 pick, and we can get into that a little bit when we talk about them. But I wouldn't be surprised because, I mean, right now they do have D'Lo, they have Karl Anthony Towns, they got younger pieces like Jarrett Culver. I mean, they're a team that's trying to make the playoffs right now, and I feel like the number 1 overall pick doesn't necessarily fit that timeline. And so I think I wouldn't be surprised at all to try and see them go out and make a trade and get some pieces that can help them now, because I think that's kind of fits the timeline with their 2 stars. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's go ahead and hop into the 12th seed in the Eastern Conference. So the New York Knicks. This is going to be an enjoyable one. But Davis, go ahead. What are you going to do with the Knicks?
So if I'm the Knicks, I'm going to be trying to trade up in this draft. Maybe that's just because, they haven't had a lot of success in trying to get free agents to, want to play in New York. And that's problems with their ownership and their, front office. That's not necessarily a problem with New York City specifically. I mean, obviously guys are willing to go play for, Brooklyn, but why not the Knicks? Why would you not want to play in Madison Square Garden every night? I think from a outside like macro perspective, I think a lot of people would want to play for the Knicks if they had more faith in their front office to not just screw them over. And so kind of along that lines, I do think there's a little bit of hope for this team for next season. But I still don't see them anywhere close to making the playoffs. I think they need to be starting to look at options to get rid of Kevin Knox. They gave it a shot. They've given him a couple seasons to, see what he had in him, coming out of Kentucky, I believe. He was a good little scorer, very athletic and, able to hang with, guard multiple positions. But, it just a lot of his skills and upside hasn't really translated into the NBA. But I think some teams might still think highly of him because of how bad the Knicks player development has been, that if he's in a right system, I could still see Kevin Knox thriving. And I don't know if that could be a potential, go after Chris Paul and throw in, Mitchell Robinson, Kevin Knox, and someone else to try to make that work and try to help, because the Thunder, are very good at player development. And, they want a lot of younger pieces at this point to try to match their timeline for the next 10 years. And so, why not go for a guy like Kevin Knox and, Mitchell Robinson and, whoever. Because I know Chris Paul has been linked with potentially going with the Knicks, which also I've heard rumors that if that does happen, Carmelo Anthony wants to go back to the Knicks and play alongside CP3, which I think would just be enjoyable basketball to watch.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, I mean, at this point, I do think Chris Paul is an ideal player that if they can try to get in a trade this offseason, they should absolutely go after him. They need someone that is a veteran like presence and someone that's able to kind of whip some sense into this team that, the coaches and, the front office just aren't able to do. And, we saw what Chris Paul was able to do with the Thunder. I'm not saying those expectations should be there day one if he goes with the Knicks, because I think this was a little bit, I don't know. It's just kind of hard to say because I don't want to put that amount of pressure on Chris Paul to be able to do that with another young core with, different circumstances. The Thunder are just a better organization in general. And so, he's more willing to thrive in that veteran role. But, if he's with the Knicks, he might just be trying to take over the team and, help him win some games and make his, legacy look a little bit better in the limelight. But, RJ Barrett, obviously he had a solid season. He had some shooting inconsistency issues at times and some weird shot selection too. But I mean, I think that's still okay for him at this point, especially being a top 5 pick. And being just what's his nickname? The Canadian
Maple Mamba.
Maple Mamba. Yeah. Like he's always been like a good scorer. That has, that's just kind of his thing. Like he just kind of helps take over a team and try to get them over the next point. But I do think Mitchell Robinson is a real good player for them. And I think if they are exploring trades for Chris Paul, they should try to work it in any way that they can protect Mitchell Robinson from that trade and RJ Barrett. But everyone else, as far as I'm aware, they can go. And I did have one quick stat that I wanted to run by you, a little, what would you call it? A little trivia. So let me find. Because Elfrid Payton had a very sneaky season, right? How many assists do you think he averaged this season?
I know he averaged a lot. It's like 8.8.
No, it's 7.2, but even still, I think that's still a lot more than a lot of people would expect from him at this point in his career with that Knicks team. But I just remember seeing that at one point or the other, and I was like, wow. Granted, I wasn't watching a lot of Knicks games. They're not a team that I really enjoy tuning in to watch them lose. But still, sneaky good season from Elfrid Payton behind the helm. But they still need someone that is able to, dictate the tempo a little bit better for their offense and kind of settle things down whenever, those large runs start to happen against them where they're just, getting absolutely dusted in the first quarter. Someone like Chris Paul, someone, even Russell Westbrook, if they could try to go after him, I wouldn't hate that. I know Russell Westbrook is probably not the safest guy in this Rockets team. And so if you're the Knicks, why not? Someone, anyone. They just need help. They need help.
Yeah. So, man, the New York Knicks, I can only see them going one or two routes, and I don't know what they want to do. I really don't. Their management's so crazy, but they can either do one or two things. They can either try and say, you know what, we're going all in. We're going to try to make the playoffs and go out and make those big trades, those big signings. Go get a Chris Paul, Westbrook, that sort of thing. Or they can try and sort of stay the course, I guess, but develop their players. Because, the issue is if they go after and make these big trades, I don't see the point in it. Because if they go after these big stars to try and make the playoffs, who cares if you make the playoffs? You're not competing for a championship if you have Chris Paul and Carmelo Anthony and RJ Barrett on your roster. You're not competing for a championship. You're probably not even going to get out of the second round. You might not even get out of the first round, depending on who you play, let's be honest. It's just, I don't think that's their best course of action because they're going to destroy their future. If you go and try and go get Chris Paul, who has maybe a couple good years left, one or two, you're going to be giving up Mitchell Robinson, probably Kevin Knox, probably picks. There's also the chance. I don't know. I doubt the Knicks would give up RJ Barrett, but there's a chance. The Thunder are going to want them. It's just so I would not try and make those trades. I think what they need to do is focus on investing in player development and really trying to do a lot better in growing these players. I think RJ Barrett could be their their franchise player. I think he has a lot more development to do, but I think he can do it. I just don't like the idea of bringing all these players. Last year they missed out on all the big time free agents and they decided, hey, it'd be a good idea to just give massive contracts to terrible players. Like, that just makes no sense. Like, now, and just blow your cap on and be stuck under like crappy contracts. I mean, that's the issue that's been with like Solomon Hill for a few years. I mean, someone said, hey, let's pay him $14 million a year, and then now no one wants him on their roster. It's just, I just think that the Knicks should not go blow their money. I don't think it's the best idea to just go trade all your young talent, because at the end of the day, I don't care what they try to do. There's not enough trades and free agency signings they can make this offseason to compete for a championship. And in my opinion, if you're going to blow up your roster and try and get rid of all your young talent, you're doing it to compete for a championship. And I don't see that being feasible for them in any way, shape, or form.
What do you think their timeline is if they stay the course with their young guys and try to continue to rebuild through the draft as to when they can start competing for a championship? Are you saying like 8 years from now, 5 years from now? Because to me, it seems very far off.
To me, it'd be 4. I think if they can start making good picks now, I think there's trades they can make.
They haven't been able to make good picks in the draft. They really haven't.
But I mean, the thing is, like, that's on them. I don't think going out and getting old veteran players is going to help push them to compete for a championship. I mean, I think going and getting, like, I mean, these are just the people we've been talking about, like, but going and getting Russ or Chris Paul and like Carmelo Anthony, like, that team is not going to compete for a championship. I'll be honest, like, those aren't players that there's a lot of players in the NBA that aren't going to want to go to the Knicks and play with some of those guys. I know a lot of people don't like to play with Russell Westbrook. I know I like Chris Paul personally, but like, I know a lot of times, like, there's been a lot of reports that like he turns off players in the locker room because he's so competitive and things like that. I mean, Carmelo Anthony's had his histories. I mean, obviously he's had a much better year this year, but I just don't think that just getting rid of all the young talent, because they have some good pieces, and getting rid of it doesn't make sense, in my opinion. I think if you're going to make trades, I would say at minimum you're keeping RJ Barrett and Mitchell Robinson, which I know you said earlier, but I think if they try and go get like a marquee player, they're giving up one of those two. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. I don't care who the player is, because I don't think that pushes their timeline far. I think it hurts them more than helps them. It might help them immediately right now, but they're just going to get in that situation like the Pistons and be in limbo. They're going to be in that scenario where, yeah, they might make the 8th seed in the playoffs for a couple of years, but guess what? Who cares? They're not going to get out of the first round. They're not competing for a championship. They're going to get terrible draft picks. I just don't like that idea.
The only difference for me, though, with the Knicks is we've both mentioned how horrible their player development and their drafting is. So with a team that has a bad track record with not only selecting young players, but also developing those young players, then how are they a team that can find some type of success for committing through that route?
I think that's hiring better personnel. I mean, go get a new GM. If your GM sucks, go get a new GM.
Oh,
if you
I
don't
agree.
like how your coach develops your players, go get a new coach. And I think that's part of it. And I know it's like their owner sucks too, but I mean, those are the changes I would make. I don't think they need to make – I don't think there's any immediate sweeping changes they can make with their roster. I don't think there's anything they're going to do in the draft that's going to just be monumental for them. I think the best decision they can do in the offseason is go out and invest in good player development, better scouting, a good GM. I think that's what they need to focus on, because that's what's going to set them up for the future.
I mean, that's every team, though.
That's fair. I mean, that's fair. But I think there's teams that, I mean, you don't have to have the best GM in the world and you can still compete for a championship. I mean, I don't think the Golden State Warriors are going to be out there. I mean, obviously they have a good GM. I don't think they're going to be like, oh, I mean, if we had a bad GM, I mean, we're not going to compete for a championship right now. I mean, a GM right now doesn't mean anything to them. And so I just think obviously, like, every team wants a good GM, but I think that should be a priority for the Knicks, where it might not be a priority for other teams.
No, I get that.
All right, so let's go ahead and go to the 11th seed in the East. We got the Chicago Bulls, just hired a new coach. Davis, what are you going to make of this offseason? What sort of changes?
So I don't think they need to be making a ton of changes, honestly. They were a team that came into this season with playoff aspirations and they underachieved. They probably were one of the bigger disappointments this season, but they also had, in my opinion, one of the worst coaches in NBA history in Jen Boylan, and the players weren't able to really commit to, what he was offering and buy into his system. And so the writing was on the wall, because I don't remember where I saw it, but like the last 8 hires prior to Billy Donovan had all been first time coaches. And to me, that is a lot of the reason why this team has struggled to find some type of groove and consistency and try to get on the right page. And so I think with bringing in Billy Donovan, he's not, the most elite coach of all time by any means. We saw what he was able to do with Russell Westbrook to some degree. And he's had his problems in the playoffs, but this team is just trying to get into the playoffs and, help these young players develop because they have a lot of good young pieces. And Billy Donovan has been, well, first of all, he used to be a college coach, obviously. And then from that, he came into the NBA and has had a lot of success with developing players as well. And so for me, I think it's a smart fit from that standpoint for trying to give this team a little bit more stability from the coaching position for the future. Because I don't think Billy Donovan for them is going to be a scapegoat if they struggle next season. He's going to be a guy that they have for the next 3 to 5 to 6 or 7 years, and is just not going to be a question mark for them. So now they can be focusing on their team, their roster composition, and make the right coaching decisions during the game. And because honestly, Zach LaVine I felt very bad for him for the last 2 or 3 seasons because he's a phenomenal player, but just doesn't get the publicity or the press because he's been on a bad team and isn't able to deliver on a lot of wins. But a lot of that is not his problem. That's really not. And I think Lauri Markkanen, there's still another level to his game that he can unlock. And I know he regressed a little bit this season, but I do think Billy Donovan will be focusing on making sure that he does not regress further in this next season, and that he's able to open up their offensive scheme so that he's a little bit more integral of a piece. And then with obviously Kobe White is a very, very good young player, had a great rookie campaign. I don't have any problems with Wendell Carter. Daniel Gafford is a little bit of a question mark for me, along with Denzel Valentine. But to me, I think this team could be really good 3 years from now if they a lot of teams could benefit from having the Heat culture. But if they're able to just commit to playing as a team, just bringing full energy, full effort every single night, I think they'll be fine. I really do. And I know you have some problems with what's his name, Otto Porter being on that lineup. But with him being injured last season, we weren't able to see how he was really able to implement into that system perfectly and stuff like that. But I still think Otto Porter is kind of I see him a little bit like Harrison Barnes in some aspects, just that, he's a good role player. He's one of the better role players in the league. He's not a star. He's not going to win you games night in, night out, but he will thrive in his role. And so with these young guys that can count on that consistency from Otto Porter, maybe he's overpaid. That's a different conversation, but I still think him
$27 million a year.
Harrison Barnes was overpaid too.
Not $27 million.
I know. But when you have a lot of younger players that aren't, expecting those bigger contracts, you can afford to pay a little bit more for a role player that you think could be a good fit within your system. And so even I know they got a new general manager this offseason too. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I remember he has been with the Denver Nuggets for the previous X amount of seasons and has been, part of the reason why that they've been able to draft so well and, kind of has helped, build culture in Denver after, the whole Allen Iverson, Carmelo Anthony situation. But he's been a big reason as to, how the Denver Nuggets are succeeding to where they are now. So I think this team has a lot to, look forward to for these next couple of years. Next season could be a little rocky, just trying to get a new coach, new system, They have new ownership, or not new ownership, but new front office to try to, just new viewpoints to try to, shift out the old regime and kind of their viewpoints of their players that they had kind of been high on, and then, make a big splash potentially. I don't think Chicago's out of the realm for a team for a free agency destination for a big star to go into, especially if they're able to, build on these young players this season and kind of make it a more attractive, spot for, a potential star to go in the 2021 free agency.
Yeah, I think the Bulls getting Billy Donovan was a great little pickup for them. I think he's, in my opinion, coach of the year. I think he deserved it. I think what he did with that Thunder's roster was just absolutely incredible, and I think he's going to really be able to help out a lot with the player development in Chicago. I think I genuinely can see Zach LaVine, Markkanen, and Kobe White kind of being the three studs on that team in the future. I think that's a team that could be a consistent playoff team. I think their biggest weaknesses are just kind of what you said with that energy level. I mean, defense and rebounding at the end of the day, like that's energy. And so I think just being tenacious, and I think a lot of that this last season was from how terrible their coach was, but I think they just kind of need to come into next season and want it. I think they have the talent to make playoffs, especially in the East. I just think they need to really want it really bad and grind for it and be tenacious, night in, night out. I think Zach LaVine I feel bad for the man because I think he's a great player. I think Kobe White will become a really good point guard in this league. I just think if anything they do in this offseason, I think they just need to maybe fill out some of their role players more. I think the role players in this roster are not good. The only one I'm okay with would be maybe Chris Dunn. I think he's a good point guard defender, very, very excellent in the steals category. I just think there's so many weaknesses on that side of the roster, and I'd love to have see them go out in this offseason, maybe make a trade, a little free agency signing, pick up a little piece here or there. I know a great pickup for them. I doubt they get them because I know so many teams are going after like a Joe Harris. I think that'd be a beautiful pickup for them. Someone can do a little 3-and-D action. I just think they need to fill out that bench to sort of with some scorers and then have that starting lineup just really be tenacious on that defensive end and rebounding. I think that's what they need to do in this offseason. I think Billy Donovan's especially going to help with that latter half of that defense sort of side. So I'm definitely looking to see how the Bulls play next year, though. I definitely think they can make the playoffs without a doubt.
So
let's go. Oh, go ahead.
No, we can just move on. It's all right.
Well, I was just going to move us to the next stage. So if you were going to say something, go ahead.
So I had to check my phone because I remember having a conversation with you via text, and
Okay.
I pulled out the receipts, all right? And you were very confused about this whole Billy Donovan hiring at the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was centered around, we had discussion about, is this team a rebuild or not? Is this, because Billy Donovan left the Thunder because he didn't want to be a part of a rebuild, allegedly. And then, so you were very perplexed because you considered this team a rebuild. And then after this conversation today, I'm not getting the impressions that you think this is a full rebuild, but more of a, team with some young potential that, if they have the right, schemes, the right, I don't know, are able to make a couple good decisions in this offseason, they can be there. They can be there next season fighting for the playoffs. Do you still think that?
I think Billy Donovan can help him out. I just thought it was a very odd decision by him. He left. I mean, the Thunder are a better team than the Chicago Bulls. So why are you leaving the Thunder because you don't want to be a part of a rebuild and you want to compete and you go to the Chicago Bulls? That makes no sense to me. Why not go to a team like, I don't know, the Indiana Pacers who are in the playoffs or the Brooklyn Nets who were looking for coaches? There were several teams going out and looking for coaches this offseason and that made the playoffs, and he went with the Chicago Bulls. I thought that was just really, really odd and peculiar. I mean, I definitely think he can help this roster. I think they can make the playoffs, but it just doesn't make sense to me. I think why would you leave a team because you think they're rebuilding and then go to a team who's worse. It makes no sense to me. I think why not go to a competing team?
And I think, honestly, he might not have been getting those phone calls from the Pacers, from those playoff contenders.
Really?
Because, yes. And the reason is that those teams have expectations of making the playoffs, but not only making the playoffs, but trying to go further than they have in the past. And Billy Donovan, one of his biggest weaknesses that has been exposed in the past, and a reason that, teams are, kind of okay with moving on from him, is because he's had his playoff woes. I mean, he blew a 3-1 lead. Like, he also, he got the Thunder back in the series, but, they still ended up losing. And those are just two examples. But some of the decisions along the way that kind of get him there has always been kind of brought into question about, how he's viewed as a coach around the league. And so he might not have been getting those calls. And so maybe going to a team that is trying to get into the playoffs and try to kind of rebuild his reputation, around committing to a new team. I understand that, the Thunder are, as of last season, a better team than the Bulls, but I would not be surprised if the Bulls are better next season than the Thunder. And I think the biggest reason that I was saying a lot of that I don't think the Bulls are rebuild, are in a rebuild state, is because they kind of have gone through that rebuild over the last 3 or 4 years, and they have a lot of the young pieces now. And so at this point, they're kind of trying to make that next step and make the playoffs. And so I don't think it's within the realm of, or it's not within the realm of possibility for them to make the playoffs next season. And I don't think the Thunder, especially if they move away from Chris Paul, which is likely that they will, they're committed to a zillion draft picks by the Clippers for the future. And, their rebuild process is going to be a lot longer. But, the Thunder absolutely are going to be able to build a dynasty if they, Sam Presti is one of the best general managers in the NBA and has done a great job, picking, their draft picks for the Thunder. And so I have a lot of confidence in them in the future, but I still think if you remove Chris Paul from the situation and, there's still question marks around the, some of the other like spots on the Thunder. Cause I know, what's his name? White boy that can shoot on the Thunder. Danilo Gallinari. He's a free agent this offseason, correct? I believe so.
He might be. I can't tell for sure off the top of my head.
Because if you take both Chris Paul and Gallinari away from that roster, and I think Dennis Schroeder is also going to be looking elsewhere for this season. Without those three pieces, I don't think they're making the playoffs.
I mean, those are the three of their four best pieces. I mean, you could say, well, if the Lakers don't have LeBron James and AD, they're not going to make the playoffs next year. I mean, I would agree with you. They don't have three of their four best players. Yeah, they're not going to make the playoffs.
That's why they're committing to the rebuild this offseason, though. And so that's a longer time frame than the Bulls in terms of, having playoff aspirations, in my opinion. So that's why Billy Donovan signing with them made more sense to me.
I don't think they should have committed to the rebuild, too. I don't think that doesn't make sense to me. Why not do something like the Boston Celtics where you're consistently competing every year and then you're just adding more and more and more and more talent every year, and then your team gets disgusting. I think that's what I think they should do.
Every team would like to be like the Celtics like that, of course. It's just
very hard. Why would you
consistently?
That's why, one, Chris Paul, obviously ideal scenario, they get that contract off, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if Chris Paul's still on this team because a lot of teams don't want to deal with that contract. I mean, that's $40 million a year. That's a lot of money. Dennis Schroeder, Danilo Gallinari, they may be looking elsewhere, but at the same time, I think they're just looking to get paid, and I bet the Thunder paid them as well. I think they're going to offer them both contracts. I think it was odd to me that the Thunder not only chose to jump into a rebuild, but at the same time, I thought it was odd that Billy Donovan would choose the Bulls. And I understand he may not have been getting calls, but at the same time, I mean, he was voted on by all the coaches as a co-coach of the year. All the coaches recognized he did an exemplary job. And I think he was getting calls. I think he may not have pursued them. Obviously we don't know for sure how that interview went, if he went out and interviewed, but I mean, maybe he did terrible, but I still think that it was just really odd to me that the Bulls is where he ended up. I just think there were other teams he could have gone to that would have been a better fit, and more aligned with the goals that he came out and said were the reason why he left Oklahoma City. So, but let's go ahead and keep moving along. Let's do the 10th seed in the Eastern Conference. We got the Charlotte Hornets. What are you going to do this offseason, Davis?
They need to hope and pray that LaMelo Ball is there at pick number 3. So, yes, Devontae Graham had a great season. Terry Rozier didn't live up to, what they're paying for him. And they haven't been able to really lock down a center for their rotation. They've kind of gone through Bismack Biyombo, Zeller brother. They need some more consistency with just a solid center piece, like a center position piece, rather. But I still don't really see this team becoming anything great next season. I actually watched a decent amount of their games just because I really liked watching Devontae Graham's season. Kansas boy. But they do have some nice young pieces. And so, I think they're a team that needs to absolutely continue to commit to rebuilding through the draft, acquiring young assets, and, getting the timelines to line up. 7 years from now, they could be talking for a playoff or for like a championship. I think their timeline's a lot longer than most teams. Not only are they a small market team that they can't attract a lot of free agents towards, but like PJ Washington, Miles Bridges, they're both pretty solid young players. Devontae Graham, we can see if he has some more another level to his game. Honestly, I really don't think there is. I think, although yes, he had a really good season, he's also I don't really know what more he can add to his game that's going to help him. He's never been the best defensive player. Maybe that's something he focuses on and the coaches try to get him to buy into. But he'll be taking his shots, and he did have a stretch of games where he had I think he had 4 or 5 game-winning threes this season, which was just it was kind of cool to see him, embracing that role and, be willing, and his teammates having faith in him to, knock down the last shot was cool. But they were fighting, and they were in a lot of the games that they ended up losing. But for me, I really think the center position is what they need to be focusing on in terms of free agency. But then they also need to be adding literally just whoever's the best available player at pick 3 for them. It's going to likely end up being Anthony Edwards, James Wiseman, or LaMelo Ball. I don't think after those 3, there's a big drop off between, the rest of the draft prospects. And so you just take the best available player. They don't really have anyone that, in terms of positions, they can afford to take a guard and take over Devontae Graham's role a little bit more. They can afford to draft someone in any type of position because at this point they just need to be acquiring the best potential talent and to be continuing that mold for the future. I don't know. I don't really know what to say besides just continuing to rebuild through the process is pretty much their best hope at having, some shots in the future.
So for me in the draft, what I think the Hornets should be going for is I want them to take LaMelo Ball. I think that'd be a nice pick for them. I think LaMelo is going to be available to them. However, I don't think the fit of LaMelo and Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier is going to work well. I would be more okay with it if they were heavily looking to get off of Terry Rozier's contract this offseason, maybe trying to go out and doing a trade or something. I'd be much more happy with that. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them try and maybe, depending on how that Warriors number 2 pick goes, because I assume the Warriors are going to try and make that trade, and we'll talk that in a little bit as well. But depending how the number 1 and number 2 picks go, I would be surprised to see them maybe try and make a trade to go get James Wiseman if they have to do the flip picks or something like what Luka and Trae Young happened, or if Wiseman falls to them, I think Wiseman would be a better fit in Charlotte if they decide to keep Terry Rozier over LaMelo Ball. However, at the same time, I've always said that if you have a top pick in the NBA draft, and that means you're terrible, and it means you need to go get the best player available, because at the end of the day, you need all the help you can get. And so I think LaMelo Ball is the most talented player in this draft. And so I do think they should go and get him, but I'd be much more content about it if they had the opportunity to get out of Terry Rozier's contract and kind of get him off his books in the offseason. And then, I mean, kind of with that Wiseman thing, I kind of agree with you. I think the center position is somewhere they need to focus on, but I think they've got the young talent. I think they just need to continue to develop, fill out the roster a little bit. I think that's a team that could compete for that 8th seed in the East next year, especially if they do well in this year's draft and that talent continues to grow and develop. Devontae Graham becomes a little bit more efficient. PJ Washington continues to grow. I think that could be a nice team.
Do you think Malik Monk at this point, because I kind of view him similarly to Kevin Knox, where he had a lot of potential coming into the league and he's just hasn't really got to the level where he's lived up to the hype? But are you buying or selling, his potential for the future? Like, do you think that we're going to see another dimension to Malik Monk's game?
I'm selling, man. I can't. I mean, I loved Malik Monk in college. He was so much fun to watch. But I mean, same thing with Kevin Knox. Like they've had all of the opportunities in the world to showcase what they can do. They got drafted by terrible teams. They were given the opportunities to go out and play and show what they can do, and it's just not coming to fruition. I mean, I see, like, for example, like I would say someone that's like kind of near their level, maybe like Alonzo Ball. Like I think Lonzo Ball still has so much more potential in his game. I think there's so much more he can do. He brings way more to the table than these players. I mean, he plays great defense. Like he's actually good at something in the NBA. He actually plays great defense. I don't think Malik Monk or Kevin Knox are players that bring a great quality to the court right now today. And I don't see them improving on anything to the point where they become like a solid player in today's NBA. And so Malik Monk to me is just someone that's on that roster. He's a non-factor for me. I don't see other teams high on him, which is why I don't think he's a sought-after trade piece or anything like that. But which is disappointing because I loved Malik Monk in college. Him and De'Aaron Fox were very fun to watch out in Kentucky. So yeah. So let's finish this up of the Eastern Conference. So the last team we got to talk about in the East is the Washington Wizards. So Davis, what are you gonna do this offseason?
They're a hard team to read in terms of what they're wanting to do with Brad Beal and the whole John Wall coming off his injury situation. There's potential there. It's very hard to project like and plan around, an injury, someone coming back from an injury and then picking up where they left off. But if John Wall does come back to somewhat of a glimpse of previous John Wall, I think this team's in playoff consideration easy. Brad Beal without John Wall was able to really thrive and embrace that role of being the dog there, the guy that's going out and winning them games night in, night out, and they're living and dying by Brad Beal. And yeah, he has some help alongside Davis Bertans, and there's probably not a big chance that they're able to get him to come back. But I think, they drafted really well with Rui Hachimura. I think that's, someone that they can be optimistic about for the future. And they do have, I believe, the 9 pick in this draft. Maybe it's the 8th pick. But they should be going after a big man that is a little bit more defensive minded. I don't really want them to go after Obi Toppin. I don't know where – I really don't know where Obi Toppin's going to end up falling in this draft. But he doesn't have a lot of the lateral agility to, be able to move like side to side very quickly down low in the post, which has been a problem for him in college and got him exposed a lot of the time by just like more powerful big men like Udoka Azubuike or, whoever. But in general, I think this whole Wizards team is very hard to like get a read on like how they kind of move forward. And I don't know why that is, but I'd like them to take Onyeka Okongwu if he's available. If he's not available though, I don't really know who they take there because they don't need a guard at this point. Like they really don't. They could use probably a solid 3-and-D wing. I don't know who hates 3-and-D wings. It seems like every team in the NBA likes 3-and-D wings. So if they're not able to take Onyeka Okongwu or they don't trade up and try to get Wiseman somehow, I don't really know if they go with anyone besides just, a traditional 3-and-D type of wing, which there are a decent amount in this draft. But I don't know. I'm not really super sold on this whole team, but I think they've been able to kind of exceed expectations these past couple seasons, and I don't know, maybe they'll do it again next season.
Yeah, so I think the Wizards, there are two things that they need to do this offseason. One, I think they need to do everything in their power to try and re-sign Davis Bertans. I think he was a bright spot on that team. I know that's going to be really difficult because he's going to be highly, highly sought after. I mean, that's a big man who can stretch the floor. But I think really trying and going after him, I think he brings a lot of value to that roster, especially with John Wall coming back to John Wall as a driver and being able to dish out to an absolute sniper. I think that is a big deal for their offensive schemes. And so I think going after him is a big deal. And then the other thing is just whether it's through a combination of the draft, maybe a free agency signing, maybe a trade here or there, they need defenders. That's what they need to do. Offensively, I think they're fine. I mean, I think I just counted up, they have 9 players averaging double digits, 9. And one of them's Bradley Beal averaging 30 points a game. So they know how to put the ball in the hoop. Their issue is they have no one that can play defense. And that's what I think they need to go after is I think they really need to go pick up a couple of defenders, combination, whether that's through the draft, free agency trades, as I said. But I think a focus on developing their defense this offseason is what's going to push them over that edge in the playoff contention next year, especially with John Wall coming back. Honestly, it would actually surprise me if the Wizards didn't make the playoffs next year. I think the only way is if there's a catastrophic injury or like Bradley Beal gets traded or something, which I don't expect him to. So this team, I think they're sitting fine right now. I think there's a few small changes here and there that they need to make, but overall, I think they just kind of need to stay the course, work on that defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I explicitly stated it, but their defense was definitely the key reason why I think they should be going after Onyeka Okongwu. I think he's just, in my opinion, the best defender in this draft.
Yeah.
I know, you have Isaac Okoro, Tyrese Halliburton. They have different defensive skill sets, but Onyeka Okongwu clogs down lanes and is very good off the pick and roll, which is just traditional packages that you see in the NBA any given night, especially during the regular season. And so I definitely echo what you're saying in terms of focusing on the defense. I personally, the only thing I agree they should try to keep Davis Bertans. I mean, he's sought after for a reason. I just don't think I really don't think they should overpay for him. And I think because of how weak this free agency class is, there will be teams that are willing to pay more than he's worth. And so, I just think they can get a little bit more bang for their buck if they go elsewhere. And I mean, I know it's tough to hear because, you don't want to give up a guy that, helped get that team to where they ended up this season. But I also don't like the idea of overpaying for players based on how much they're actually worth. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they should have that price point and say, hey, like, this is all we can offer you. And if he's not willing to hit that and come back, I mean, I agree. I don't love overpaying for players because I think you get stuck into that contract issues. I mean, it sounds fun at first, like, hey, we got our player, the guy we wanted, and then a year later you're like, holy crap, we're screwed for 4 years because we just offered this dude $25 million a year. But I think there are some nice role players in this draft could maybe go after, or draft, I mean free agency. I think there's some nice players in this free agency that can kind of suit some of their needs, fill some of the roles that they're looking to fill. But yeah, I think the Wizards are sitting fine. I fully expect them to 100% make the playoffs next year. So
Also, I'm just going to call it now. Well, it's not necessarily a call, but I think if they are not able to keep Davis Bertans in their lineup going into next season, that's going to open up the door for not only whoever they end up drafting, but also a guy named Admiral Schofield, who I think has a lot of potential. And if he was with a team like the Celtics, they would be utilizing him a little bit more and trying to unlock some of his potential. But, you know, he didn't get a ton of playing time. He's only ended up starting 2 games, I believe. But, you know, he played alongside Grant Williams at Tennessee whenever they had that like number 1 or number 2 overall seed going into the March Madness. And they were just absolutely dynamic in terms of what they can offer any given night on both ends of the floor. And so I think kind of if you're able to go away from Davis Bertans, some of the motivation behind that is because you want to try to get more out of Admiral Schofield. And I think that he's a guy that really can surprise a lot of people next year if, you know, he's able to get more playing time and what he's able to do. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to, you know, he's a big physical beast. And he also, in college at least, he was able to knock down a lot of threes. I know his three-point shooting percentage in the NBA is like 33% or something that wasn't great. But he does bring it on both ends of the floor and is someone that I could see being a good 3-and-D player and kind of just, you know, I mean, his ability to go to the lane too is also off the charts. And so he's someone that I think they need to be trying to implement more into their system to try to, you know, build beyond, you know, once John Wall is gone, they have Bradley Beal locked down for, you know, next however many years. But I do think he's someone that can be, you know, an impactful player for this team next season if he's given the opportunity.
yeah, I think that's a good point. I think they have like some of those younger players, especially they have some guys that are hovering around that like 10-point mark. I think if Bertans goes off that roster, I think some of them are going to need a step up. I mean, they get John Wall back, but I think they can find those guys that can kind of fill those gaps and that sort of thing. So, all right. Well, that kind of wraps up the Eastern Conference part of this. So let's go ahead and head to our first break.